The news from Guyana, the region and the world. Compiled in the News Talk Radio newsroom and powered by DemeraraWaves.com.
Good day with your major newscast. I'm Jessica Daw. First with the highlights. Mr. Aubrey Norton, who is among 4 persons nominated today to become leader of the PNCR, has outlined a plan to include more Indo-Guyanese in the party if he becomes leader. Leader of the Liberty and the Justice Party and Deputy Speaker of the National Assembly, Lennox Schumann, is calling on the chairman of the Guyana Election Commission to seek international help to hire a new chief elections officer. Health Minister Dr. Frank Anthony says more COVID deaths are expected as there exists reluctance to take the COVID vaccine. A West Coast Berbice 24-year-old cyclist is now dead after a female driver claimed she was blinded by lights of a vehicle approaching from the opposite direction. In the region, appeal hearing in a case challenging the constitutionality of the Barbados government's COVID-19 directives is set for March 2022 for an appeal hearing. And internationally, a draft agreement at the COP26 Climate Summit has watered down commitments to end the use of coal and other fossil fuels as countries race to reach a deal after 2 weeks of talks. The details of these stories and more in just a moment.
Advertise with us on News Talk Radio Guyana 103.1 FM for best coverage on programs on motivation, beauty and health, parenting and relationships, knowing your rights, and a variety of enlightening content, and get value for your money. Call our helpful staff today on 223-1056 or 223-1041 today.
Now the news in detail. People's National Congress Reform PNCR candidate for leadership in the party's upcoming Congress, Aubrey Norton, says he is capable of widening the party's base to include Indo-Guyanese. Mr. Norton says he intends to begin a process of engaging with the younger people to draft them into the PNCR.
You have to begin to relate to young Indo-Guyanese who tend not to be as gullible and vulnerable to the past, and to speak with them in terms of being part of the party. In the process, the party has to clearly identify a policy which says it will seek to promote all people in the party, regardless of ethnicity, once they have the requisite competence.
The aspiring leader of the PNCR believes his tenure as a lecturer at the University of Guyana and his general relationship with Indo-Guyanese gives him that edge to begin the process. He says the process hinges on interpersonal relationships.
Now, there are a number of young Indo-Guyanese who I've engaged, and at least 2 of them have endorsed me publicly. There are a number of young Indo-Guyanese I taught at the University of Guyana who were saying to me that I'm becoming the party leader, they're willing to engage. I believe essentially one has to first build confidence at the interpersonal level in people that you mean what you're saying and you intend to be fair, you intend to be transparent.
Mr. Norton believes that setting out a clear policy is also key. He says he will begin a process of educating young Indo-Guyanese on the inclusionary policies of the party.
I also believe that if you become involved in the process of educating all Guyanese, particularly young Indo-Guyanese, about your political situation and to ensure that the pitfalls that characterized us in history are outlined and overcome, then again, you'll be in a better position to relate to the Indo-Guyanese scheme.
Mr. Aubrey Norton was today nominated by several of the party's groups to become the leader of the more than a 60-year-old political party founded by LFS Samson Burnham. The party's Congress will be hosted Sunday, December 11, 2021, via a hybrid system under strict COVID guidelines. Leader of the Liberty and Justice Party, LJP, and Deputy Speaker of the National Assembly, Lennox Schumann, is calling on the chairman of the Guyana Elections Commission, GECOM, to seek international help as part of the process to hire a new chief elections officer. Mr. Schumann, in a letter dated Thursday, November 11, 2021, asked GECOM Chairman, retired Judge Claudette Singh, to solicit and accept support from international partners to appoint a CEO for GECOM and other important offices. Mr. Schumann, in his letter, says that method will help to restore the integrity, credibility, and public's confidence in the commission that is so desperately needed at this juncture. GECOM government commissioners tabled and voted for the removal of former CEO Keith Lowenfield and his deputy Roxanne Myers following the March 2020 regional and the general elections, who are before the courts charged with electoral fraud. The chairman voted with the government commissioners as a tiebreaker to end the contracts of the two officers. The deputy speaker says if GECOM does not put in place an independent process, the public fears that electoral management body will be manipulated and undermined again. Mr. Schumann points out that the commission is currently partisan, with only People's Progressive Party and coalition APNU plus AFC commissioners, and this shuts out representation from smaller parties. Mr. Schumann says the lessons of the 2020 elections are a close reminder of the need for an independent commission. The LJP leader reminded that reports from International Elections Observer groups dating back to the initial elections that came out of the Price-Carter formula have made consistent calls for a revision of a variety of processes to ensure an impartial and unbiased commission. The Caribbean Court of Justice has hinted at the need to modify the law to prevent Guyana's Director of Public Prosecution, DPP, from directing the court to commit persons. Attorney Darshan Ramdani, who is defending murder-accused Marcus Bisram, is asking the CCJ to strike down the appeal court's decision to agree with the DPP. The attorney says an individual is entitled to fairness at the judicial level.
I suppose you're saying you cannot have a fair trial unless you have an independent judiciary. Is that what you're saying?
That is the core constitutional principle, and that Section 72 must stand down. And that the separation of powers is also contained in Article 144. That's a core constitutional principle. Section 72 must stand down. The rule of law is also contained in Article 144, a core constitutional principle. Section 72 must stand down. So we say that there as well, Millard.
The DPP told the CCJ that she acted in accordance with the Constitution to rightly request and committed Mr. Bisram to trial.
The DPP is pursuant to Section 72. The DPP is merely continuing a charge. The DPP can institute a charge. The DPP can continue a charge. The DPP can institute a charge, and the magistrate hears that charge. The magistrate hearing a charge and determining a charge that the DPP has instituted does not in any way suggest that the DPP's institution of the charge or continuation of the charge is a usurpation of the judicial function of the magistrate.
The CCJ President, Justice Adrian Saunders, says the litigants may be asked to make further submission and hinted that the Apex Court may reverse its decision. Bisram moved to the CCJ after the Guyana Court of Appeal on May 31 agreed with the DPP that there was sufficient evidence to commit him to stand trial. The prosecution's case was that Bisram had instructed 5 other men to kill Narayan Dat because he had retaliated when he, Bisram, had allegedly held the man's penis and buttocks. Evidence provided by Guyanese police show that Narayan Dat had been beaten, thrown in a drain, removed and placed in a car trunk and placed on a road to make it appear as if Narayan Dat had been struck down by a vehicle. The Guyana Water Incorporated GWI says about 225 residents at Soosdijk East Bank Demerara are getting potable water for the first time. The utility company says they live at Grant Sand Road, Soosdijk. GWI says that it spent about $6 million Guyana dollars to extend the distribution network by 1,000 meters. GWI's Chief Executive Officer, Sheikh Bash, told residents there that they will have to apply for individual service connections in order to receive water for the first time. GWI says its East Bank team will be collaborating with the Soosdijk Coverden Neighborhood Democratic Council, NDC, to take this service to the residents on Friday, November 12. GWI says about 50 households back Grant Sand Road who are without access to potable water will soon be connected to the network. Health Minister Dr. Frank Anthony says more COVID deaths are expected as many persons are still not willing to take a COVID vaccine. The ministry recorded 3 deaths in the last 24 hours, taking the toll to 955.
In the past 24 hours, we've had 3 deaths, and we are going to continue to see deaths if people are not taking vaccination. What we have noticed is that most of these deaths are persons who are unvaccinated. So we have something that we know that protects you, and that is getting vaccinated. And we still have, at this point in time, people who have not taken their vaccine. And many of the persons who are dying right now, when we check their vaccine status, they're unvaccinated.
The health minister says several regions are showing increased positive cases.
So over the last 24 hours, we've recorded 98 new cases of COVID-19 across the country. And currently we have 2,444 active cases, with most of those cases being in Region 3. We have 1,085 cases in Region 3 currently. We also have 724 cases in Region 4, 215 cases in Region 6, and 194 cases in Region 10.
Dr. Anthony says generally positive cases are on the decline, including hospitalization.
Of the active cases, we currently have 49 in the hospital, with 36 of those at the Ocean View Hospital. And of those 36 at Ocean View, we now have 17 in the ICU. So generally we have seen the numbers coming down a little bit, hospitalizations coming down, but we are also seeing in some regions an increase in cases. So, like in Region 10, we have a notable increase in cases because we're now at 194, and we have seen increase in cases in Region 6.
The ministry says 389,349 adults, or 75%, are partially vaccinated, and 257,196, or 50%, are fully vaccinated. A West Coast Berbice 24-year-old cyclist, Neville Anthony, is now dead after a female driver claimed she was blinded by lights of a vehicle approaching from the opposite direction. Police investigators say the female driver, Sandra Gittins, 45 years old, who is in custody assisting police, alleges that this morning around the 5 hours, she was proceeding east along the northern side of the public road at a normal rate of speed. She told police she was blinded by lights of a vehicle coming in the opposite direction, which caused her to collide with Neville Anthony, the pedal cyclist who was proceeding west along the northern side of the said road. Police say he was thrown onto the front windscreen of the car, then onto the roadway where he received injuries to his head and about his body. He was picked up in an unconscious state and taken to Fort Wellington Public Hospital, where he was seen and examined and pronounced dead on arrival. The driver is assisting with the continuing investigations. Now for the news in the region. Opposition Senator Caswell Franklin, shopkeeper Adrian Kalman, and mini-mart owner Benson Strucker, who are challenging the constitutionality of the COVID-19 directives, will be back in court in March of 2022 for an appeal hearing. Their challenge to government's COVID-19 directives were thrown out by High Court Judge Jacqueline Cornelius, who dismissed the 4 lawsuits last month. Barbados Today News reports that attorney for the claimants, Neil Marshall, said on Thursday his clients are upset at not being able to launch their appeal on substantial grounds because they do not have the benefit of the more detailed written court decision, which had been promised by Madam Justice Cornelius within 30 days of the oral truncate version. Marshall, who is working in association with Hal Gollop QC, says he launched the appeal on November 5 on bare bones grounds after efforts failed to secure a recording of the ruling in the absence of the written judgment. In her near 2-hour decision last month, Justice Cornelius told a virtual sitting that the directives of the government were a proportionate response to the pandemic and not a breach of any fundamental rights. Senator Franklin had challenged the manner in which the emergency management legislation crafted by the government to help to control the spread of the virus in the island was imposed. He charged that the government was illegally enforcing directives that did not have Parliament's approval. Pan American Health Organization officials have revealed 48% of the Caribbean has been fully immunized against the deadly disease as COVID-19 cases continue to wane in the Caribbean. This news was announced at the organization's weekly webinar by PAHO's director, Dr. Carissa Etienne. Whereas the Bahamas is experiencing a welcome decrease in reported cases, health officials there are cautious of a possible 4th wave. The PAHO director says COVID infections are increasing in some countries in the Americas, as she points out that over the last week, 700,000 new cases and 13,000 COVID-related deaths were reported in the region. Dr. Carissa Etienne says in the Caribbean, while Cuba, Jamaica and Puerto Rico have reported decreases in new infections, cases are rising in the Dominican Republic, Trinidad and Tobago and Barbados. The Cayman Islands and Dominica are also experiencing a high number of cases. She says vaccinations continue to pick up pace in the region. 48% of people in Latin America and the Caribbean have been fully immunized against COVID, but coverage is still much lower in some countries and territories. The Trinidad and Tobago Police Service, TTPS, is warning the public about robberies related to online business transactions, something officers are calling a new phenomenon. At yesterday's TTPS media briefing, TNT Guardian reported Acting Senior Superintendent Joseph Chandul as saying there are instances where people try to transact sale online and meet at a location and are then robbed of their cash or commodity for sale. Superintendent Joseph Chandul says the TTPS is encouraging people to meet at a safe venue to conduct such activity. The senior officer urges people to use the police station as their meeting place, and if the other party refuses, then it's a red flag that everything is not above board. Superintendent Chandul says the cybercrime unit is active and engaging in the situation with a robust operation that has seen successes. And lastly, in the region, communications specialist Joanne John believes excessive misinformation on WhatsApp is contributing to COVID-19 vaccine hesitancy in Tobago. Speaking at a recent virtual discussion titled Navigating the Pandemic, hosted by the nonpartisan group Tobago Civil Net, she said that the numerous misinformation on WhatsApp has contributed to causing people to believe things that are not accurate about the COVID vaccine. The communication specialist calls for a plan of action to educate the people on how to recognize fake news on social media platforms. Ms. Joanne John is a certified career and a life coach, spent many years as a senior executive with the Canadian government. She relocated to Tobago several years ago. John says communities in which the majority of residents are people of color also pose a challenge with less trust in governments and authorities. Here now is your international news.
Hello, this is the BBC News with Fiona MacDonald. The man who led last month's military takeover in Sudan has made himself head of a new transitional ruling council. General Abdel Fattah al-Burhan hasn't included any members of the civilian coalition which shared power with the military for the past 2 years. Protests erupted in parts of Khartoum shortly after the declaration. Here's Mary Harper.
There was swift condemnation of General al-Burhan's announcement. The ousted Information Minister, Hamza Balul, described it as an extension of the coup. The UN said it was very concerning. It repeated its call for civilian politicians to be released, including the deposed Prime Minister Abdallah Hamdok, who remains under house arrest. Some civilians have been appointed to the new council, but not a single member of the coalition that shared power with the military before the coup has been given a seat.
The South African president, who oversaw the end of white minority rule, has offered an unqualified apology for apartheid in a video released shortly after his death. F.W. de Klerk, who was 85, acknowledged the pain and indignity that was inflicted. The left-wing Economic Freedom Fighters Party has demanded that he be denied a state funeral. Andrew Harding reports from Johannesburg on the posthumous message.
F.W. de Klerk addressed the many critics who said he'd never truly acknowledged his own role in the horrors of racial apartheid.
I, without qualification, apologize for the pain and the hurt and the indignity and the damage that apartheid has done to black, brown and Indians.
F.W. de Klerk will always be a divisive figure, but history will record that he helped to bring freedom to South Africa.
The UN Secretary-General Antonio Guterres has warned climate negotiators in Glasgow to pick up the pace. They're trying to reach a meaningful deal before the scheduled end of the COP26 summit on Friday. Mr Guterres told the gathering the world was heading for catastrophic temperature rises. He said governments weren't currently on track to take the steps needed to limit global warming to 1.5 Celsius.
The announcements here in Glasgow are encouraging, but they are far from enough. The emissions gap remains a devastating threat. The finance and adaptation gap represent a glaring injustice for the developing world.
Russian prosecutors have filed a lawsuit to dissolve the country's most prominent human rights group, Memorial. The group said in a statement that it had been accused of systematic violations of Russia's law on foreign agents. Memorial said the move was political and without legal basis. You're listening to the latest world news from the BBC. Hundreds more migrants have gathered in the Belarusian capital Minsk in the hope of eventually reaching the European Union. They told the BBC they were from Iraq and had flown via Syria or Turkey after each paying more than $3,000. For the second day running, the German Chancellor Angela Merkel has discussed the build-up of migrants with the Russian President Vladimir Putin. Paul Adams reports.
This migrant crisis, simmering for months, has now turned into a full-blown diplomatic row, with the UN Security Council holding urgent talks and the EU poised to adopt fresh sanctions against Belarus as early as next week. President Alexander Lukashenko has threatened to take action of his own, saying he could cut off Russian gas supplies to Europe. Any such decision would almost certainly have to come from Moscow, not Minsk, but the Russian President Vladimir Putin, speaking after his second phone call in as many days with the German Chancellor Angela Merkel, said the EU had to restore contacts with Belarus if it wanted to solve the crisis.
A parliamentary committee in Ghana started a public hearing on a bill that would impose tougher punishments on gay people. Proposals include increasing the jail term for same-sex relations from 3 years to 5. Another would introduce a 10-year sentence for those who promote gay rights. There were impassioned arguments for and against what's called the Family Values Bill. A ninth person has died as a result of last week's crash at the Astroworld Music Festival in the US state of Texas. Bharti Shahani, a university student, was 22. Police are investigating the stampede last Friday. The Pakistani authorities have removed an Islamist leader, Saad Rizvi, from a terrorism watch list, paving the way for his release from detention. The move is part of a deal with his organisation, Tehreek-e-Labbaik Pakistan, to end weeks of protests over an alleged blasphemy. BBC News.
And that was your international news. Here now is a recap of the highlights. Mr. Aubrey Norton, who is among 4 persons nominated today to become leader of the PNCR, has outlined a plan to include more Indo-Guyanese in the party if he becomes leader. Leader of the Liberty and Justice Party and Deputy Speaker of the National Assembly, Lennox Schumann, is calling on the chairman of the Guyana Elections Commission to seek international help to hire a new chief elections officer. Health Minister Dr. Frank Anthony says more COVID deaths are expected as there exists reluctance to take the COVID vaccine. A West Coast Berbice 24-year-old cyclist is now dead after a female driver claimed she was blinded by lights of a vehicle approaching from the opposite direction. In the region, appeal hearing in a case challenging the constitutionality of the Barbados government's COVID-19 directives is set for March of 2022 for an appeal hearing. And internationally, a draft agreement at the COP26 Climate Summit has watered down commitments to end the use of coal and other fossil fuels as countries race to reach a deal after 2 weeks of talks. And that was your major newscast. I'm Jessica Daw.
This has been the news, compiled in the News Talk Radio newsroom. For ongoing updates, visit demerarawaves.com, and you can check facebook.com/demwaves and twitter.com/demwaves.